Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's a real distinct privilege to be here this morning at the 5th Eat Stockholm Food Forum. And I'm inspired by the convening power of the Eat Foundation to bring together a wide range of stakeholders, including farmers and producers, scientists, policymakers, multilateral agencies, and business together to try and solve the most significant developmental challenge that we all face this century. The big intractable problem that we are trying to address as an industry is how do we produce food on a sustainable basis that from a nutrition standpoint provides the adequacy that we all require, but also from an environmental standpoint is sustainable, and even more importantly, the food that we produce is affordable. As all the speakers before me have said, and it's apparent to now all of us, that the agricultural production system and the food system is broken. FAO commissioned True Cost to do a study of what is the cost of externalities required in producing the 4 major food crops, rice, wheat, soybean, and corn, and the 4 major protein items, poultry meat, lamb meat, beef meat, and pork meat. And they established that for 80% of the production of the 4 major food crops, the total externalities in terms of the benefits that we derive from the ecosystem to produce those 4 food crops is $1.15 trillion. And for the 4 protein items is $1.85 trillion. Together, it's $2.97 trillion, which is the invisible cost of nature, the benefits that we derive from the ecosystem. So all of us who are being provided that food are not paying the true cost of food. Mother Nature's back office is not set up, and we are not being issued those invoices. But if we were really issued those invoices and we paid for that food, many people who are still struggling to afford that food, 817 million go to bed hungry every day. 60%, it's a travesty of justice, are smallholder farmers. And we saw from Dr. Sania's presentation, 2 billion people suffer from micronutrient deficiencies, another 2 billion people are obese and overweight, 600 million of them are overweight. We have 155 million children stunted. We have 55 million children being wasted. That clearly shows that the food system is broken. And in addition to that, in order to produce the food that we consume today, we account for 25% of all the world's greenhouse gas emissions. We account for 71% of all the freshwater withdrawals. We account for 80% of all the deforestation that occurs in the world. We have to fundamentally reimagine agriculture. How are we going to solve the smallholder farming systems? My company, Olam, in our supply chain ecosystem, we work with about 4.7 million farmers who supply the various raw materials and ingredients that we source. We are also very significant direct farm producers in terms of an upstream footprint where we grow 21 different crops across multiple countries, both permanent tree crops and broadacre row crops. For the smallholder farmers, many of them, the only way they will survive is to reduce the cost of production by between 50 and 60% and to increase their yields. How do you reduce the cost of production, increase the yields on a sustainable basis from an environmentally sustainable point of view? The only solution is to really adopt regenerative agricultural practices. And that is the only way they can reduce costs and they can increase yields. I'm not against farming with chemicals and fertilizers. There is a place for it. The largeholder farming systems have the ability to control the consequences and the adverse consequences of having input-intensive agriculture. But we cannot afford to continue to have intensive agriculture for smallholder farmers, lose our topsoil, and lose massive amounts of soil health as a result of the way we are farming. So that needs to be fundamentally reimagined. If we are to change the system and fix the broken system, 5 things have to happen together. Firstly, we need to be the individual change that we want to see in others. If you're not going to change individually, no change is going to happen. Secondly, our companies have to change. Thirdly, even if we change individually and our companies change, we're not going to change the world. Sectors, the whole global agribusiness sector, and that's where Eat Stockholm Food Forum comes into play. We have to develop a sectoral roadmap of sustainably producing the food. Fourthly, civil society has to work with private sector has to work with civil society. Today, they treat each other with suspicion. We are not going to achieve any change if that doesn't happen. And finally, governments and policymakers have to come to party. And while I am taken in by Christiana Figueroa's stubborn optimism, and we achieved 3 miracles this century in terms of the Paris Accord, the UN SDGs, and also the biodiversity goals that we had, the Aichi biodiversity targets. 5 biodiversity goals, 20 targets. We are now in 2018. We have to achieve those targets in 10 years by 2020. We are way behind. As a businessman, I believe that we have a single-digit chance of achieving the UN SDGs, of achieving the climate change accord targets, and of achieving the biodiversity goals, because as business people, we will be fired from our jobs if all that we did is to come up with the grand pronouncements of ambition and aspiration, but no operational architecture of making that happen. And we need to work together to make that happen. Thank you.